All right. We're going to get started for those who came now. One moment, I'm going to pull up. All right, hang on one second. Okay, welcome to today's monthly Feed Your Mind series hosted by No Shame on You. Today, we are talking about managing anxiety during uncertain times, tips and tools for coping with current events. I'm Wendy Singer, and on behalf of our board of directors, staff, and volunteers, I welcome you to today's program. No Shame on You is dedicated to eliminating stigma associated with mental health conditions so the people who need the help will seek it, family and friends will know how to provide proper support, and to save lives. No Shame on You achieves its mission through community outreach programs, workshops, online presence of over 120,000 social media followers, a weekly blog, podcast, resource distribution and creation. And we partner with organizations throughout the Chicagoland and even the country. We're known for our inclusive, consistent, and responsive programming for all people and backgrounds. Today, I want to introduce an incredible woman, my colleague, Dr. Anat Geva. Anat is the Director of Strategic Initiatives for No Shame on You for the last several years and is responsible for creating our content development, along with the expansion and implementation of new mental health program initiatives. She serves as a lay leader on several boards in the community. She is known for her creativity, analytical skills, love of collaboration, and committed to lifelong learning. Anat graduated from Northwestern University Pritzker School of Law with JD, and then also earned a PhD in cognitive and clinical psychology from the University of Michigan. She is also a graduate of the Wexner Heritage Program. Anat, welcome, and thank you for doing this for us today. We are recording, so anyone attending will be receiving a recording of this program.
Good to be here today. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here just so that, does everybody see it? Great. Okay, so today we're going to talk about managing anxiety during uncertain times. These are certainly somewhat uncertain times. There's a lot of if you look at the headlines, it feels like we're being accosted every second by something over which we kind of feel like we don't have control. So we're going to talk about that today, and then we're going to talk about some coping skills. We'll start off with, I just want to highlight that we're actually still recovering from the after effects of COVID, right? We feel like in some ways we've moved on, but actually we're still in recovery mode from those early pandemic lockdowns and then everything that happened thereafter. The American Psychological Association, since 2007, it has been commissioning a survey in the United States, and it's called Stress in America, and it did another one this past year. And based on data or polling that was collected in August, Americans were asked, name the factors that are stressing you out. And probably what's not surprising is that they said things like political divisiveness, global conflicts, if we think now about, the Mideast or Sudan or Ukraine, just to mention a few, there's climate change. And actually today I'm going to focus on political divisiveness, global conflicts, and climate change as a sort of representative of other ongoing stressors. Like the skills that we're going to talk about, they apply, you can use them in any situation. People also talked about racism and discrimination, violence and mass shootings, healthcare, the economy. I mean, the list was quite long. And this confluence of crises actually weighs pretty heavily on our collective consciousness. and it leads to chronic anxiety. Let's start. We're going to start with, I just want to sort of take a temperature in the room. I know not everybody seems to have their camera on. That's fine. You can either use the hand icon to raise your hand. I'm going to ask some questions, or you can, in your mind, just sort of think to yourself. So I'm going to make some statements, and I want to know whether or not it resonates with you. So when I think about the upcoming election and current political climate in the United States, I feel disgust. All right, thank you, Anna. I feel moral outrage. Right. I feel sad. There are family members with whom I avoid talking about the current election for fear that such a conversation is going to strain our relationship. All right. So those are sort of common emotions or feelings or thoughts that are associated with our upcoming US election. And I think what comes out of the stress study, and also I think what I'm guessing many people here feel, is that these elections are taking a toll on our emotional and physical health. And if we want to think about why, it's that actually politics are quite personal. They're linked to our core values and our moral convictions. And because these moral convictions are very central to our sense of self, anytime there's a political event that challenges these moral convictions, like let's say being, wanting civil rights, right? Anytime there's a challenge to that moral conviction we have that civil rights are important, we take that actually very personally. It's like a personal affront. And so then it's not surprised then that these challenges to our identity, basically, are met with really strong negative emotional responses. And by the way, this has actually changed over time. And here's just like a piece of data or some data on this. In 1960, 4% of Democrats and 4% of Republicans said that they would be disappointed if their child married someone from the opposite political party. Okay, 4%. I don't have data from 2024, but in 2018, 45% of Democrats and 35% of Republicans reported they'd be unhappy if their child married someone from the opposite political party. So we can see politics are personal. They become very defining, and they can be, and over time they've become quite polarizing. We also have world conflicts going on right now. And again, you can participate either by raising your hand, or you can participate by in your heart and tell me whether or not these statements resonate with you. Right now, I'm going to just make some statements about the Middle East. When I think about the current conflict in the Middle East, I feel horrified. I feel grief. I feel powerless. I feel very fragile. I'm afraid to share my views with colleagues for fear of being socially isolated. And that will probably depend on where you work, and but people are experiencing that in the workplace. So anxiety about the world or world conflict is actually quite common, and it can be triggered by news about war or death and destruction. And of course, that's what the world conflicts look like. And that's because they're known to stir up feelings of uncertainty. So when there's a conflict, even if it's on the other side of the world, we start to wonder, how is this going to affect our national security? How is it going to affect our loved ones? there's grief about human suffering. We know that a 2024 Pew Research poll showed that 83% of those hearing about or reading news about the Israel-Hamas war said that they felt very sad. We know people feel helpless because they don't know, there's something that they don't like, something they want to stop, but they don't know how. And then there's also the guilt. Like, here I am getting mad at the barista because, they gave me oat milk instead of almond milk, but like across the ocean, there are people who don't know where their next meal is going to come from. And of course, we're particularly sensitized to it or have a reaction to it if we have particular experience like we know people in combat, right? Are we from that region? Do we have family and friends who live there? What about our own history? Have we ourselves been, lived in a trauma zone? Have we have our own hate-based or discrimination-based trauma? And, not surprisingly, this February poll, Pew poll, found that Jewish and Muslim Americans, in response to what's going on in the Mideast, were, most likely to experience sadness, anger, exhaustion, and fear. And by the way, there's also gender differences. Actually, women are more likely, for instance, in response to the Israel-Hamas war, women were more likely to experience fear than men. And now let's look at climate change, right? This is another thing that's been in the headlines a lot. And again, I'm going to just make a couple of statements here. And again, in your heart or on Zoom, let me know, think about whether or not the statement resonates with you. When I think about climate change, I feel hopeless. I feel worried. I feel small and insignificant and unable to implement change. So climate change, which is also known as eco-anxiety, is this pervasive dread about the current and future state of our planet. It's feeling really overwhelmed in the face of devastating impact of climate change or deforestation or the loss of biodiversity. And we can become very overwhelmed and disheartened. And particularly, people worry about next generations. And these are somewhat existential worries about the future. But there's also climate change can also affect mental health, like sort of more directly. So for instance, there are studies that have shown, across the board, that as temperatures rise, we have more psychiatric visits to the ER. And then, of course, if climate change is resulting in displacement, migration, food insecurity, that's going to then be associated for those people who have been directly impacted with a variety of mental health struggles and potentially behavioral and learning problems as well. One thing about climate change, by the way, is young people tend to feel eco-anxiety, as we'll call it, more so than older generations. And young people, in addition, as a result, sort of end up feeling very invalidated, very betrayed, very abandoned. There was a study that looked at a cohort of like 10,000 young adults across the world, and something like 60% of people that age describe themselves as very worried about the climate. So that's just something. All right, so we've talked about the fact that there's anxiety about climate change. We've talked about how there's anxiety about political conflict, anxiety about wars, but I guess we haven't actually defined what anxiety is. And anxiety is a feeling of tension or fear or uneasiness. And it's focused on a future-oriented sort of diffuse threat. And it can lead to insomnia, difficulty concentrating, irritability. It's this persistent worry, even if you don't have a specific stressor. And it's not necessarily a disorder, because anxiety disorders are basically when the anxiety is such that it's so severe and it lasts a certain amount of time that it actually impacts your ability to have relationships or ability to go to work. So that's by the way an anxiety disorder. Anxiety is different than stress. Right? Stress is actually in response to an external trigger, and it's short term. And if the stressor goes away, then the stress goes away. So for instance, I'm really stressed about a work deadline I have. Well, once I meet the work deadline, I actually feel my stress level goes down. That being said, I'm going to talk here about for the purpose of this program, we're actually going to use stress and anxiety interchangeably, because basically, even if it's short-term versus long-term, longer term, the symptoms tend to be the same, and you can actually use the same coping skills, whether it's, again, what should I use if I'm anxious about something that's upcoming, or if I have this sort of diffuse, sort of existential anxiety about, climate change. We've also talked about collective anxiety, and collective anxiety is a real phenomenon. In German. It's actually called, pardon my German pronunciation, it's called Weltschmerz, which actually translates into something like world pain or world weariness. And I just thought that I liked that because it is collective anxiety is basically this sort of despair, hopelessness that's experienced by a lot of people, like a large number of people, simultaneously, usually in connection with some kind of big world event that is hard for us to change on our own. And part of what happens in this moment of collective anxiety is that we actually also end up realizing the way that we're all interlinked throughout the world, and that somebody else's suffering could then actually become our own suffering. So again, it's this sort of existential fear, and with this sort of recognition that our existence is a little bit fragile. So it's a collective anxiety. We're not all going to feel the same way about different. We don't all experience collective anxiety over the same things. As I discussed a little bit before, right? Like it depends on context. So that different situations might trigger different individuals and might also trigger them differently, right? Like what are my past experiences? Where am I from? So my personal experiences might actually impact how I perceive a situation. And then actually of note is that we're actually more likely to experience collective anxiety in response to human-made incidents than risks that occur naturally. We don't know why. Probably has something to do with the fact that we have some sense that for human-made incidents, like we have some control over it. But it isn't necessarily a rational response to think that human-made incidents should make us more anxious than natural events. So for instance, I think we might have this anxiety or collective anxiety around terrorism, but actually more people and there's more damage every year from natural disasters, from hurricanes and things of that sort. So, but that is collective anxiety. We're gonna talk for a second about the effects on the body. We're gonna watch a really short clip. Let's see if I can do this right. Hold on. Oh, wait. We'll get there. Okay. Yeah.
Watch this. One little piece of paper can have a remarkable effect. Stress is stressful. But if you understand a bit about what it is, you'll be better able to deal with it. First though, take a few deep breaths. In fact, do that anytime you feel stressed. It helps. Stress is a survival mechanism. When danger appears, it can get you out of trouble quickly. Your body crashes up the gears and throws all its resources into getting you moving. Your heart pumps furiously to increase blood pressure, glucose is sent to the muscles as a fuel injection, and you become totally focused on what psychologists call fight or flight. Thing is, this emergency state is only meant to last just long enough to get you out of danger. But here in the 21st century, we stress about different things, and for much, much longer. Your brain and body stay on red alert, and you'll be less able to think clearly, learn, or remember things. Take a few more.
All right. So, I like that video. First of all, I love the accent. Secondly, I think it's just done very well in the sense that you can really see how that fight or flight response from an evolutionary perspective is very effective, and especially in response to like a single adverse episode. It's what allows us to survive. And the stress response can be like, it can also be beneficial, right? It's not always pathological. It can actually be really constructive and induce action. So for instance, I feel a little bit of anxiety or stress, so I'll study harder for a test because I'm worried about, I need a certain grade in order to, pass the year. Or, again, the example before of like, when you have a hard deadline, a little bit of anxiety is what makes sure you make that deadline. For a sport, if you want to make the basketball team that year, having a little bit of anxiety about what if you don't make it is what makes you practice every day. The problem is when there's too much stress, right? Then it leads to this fight or flight response, which is really unsettling, even nerve-wracking. And then that's when the anxiety is actually working against you. And so it's this sort of Goldilocks situation, right? Where like too little like doesn't really get you to be, I guess. It's fine if you're relaxing on a Sunday afternoon, but too little means you're not that motivated. There's sort of an optimal amount where you're motivated. And then there's a point at which it's beyond, where it's too much. Either too much or it's too long, and then it has this very negative effect on you. And that impact, what we're saying here is that your body, when you're anxious or stressed, right, like your body is on high alert. And if it's chronically on high alert, right, so your heart rate is beating fast, your blood vessels are constricted. You're not taking in as much oxygen as you should in every breath because you're in this fight or flight mode. You actually end up with all sorts of ailments. So there's increased likelihood in hypertension or cardiovascular diseases. There's higher cholesterol levels, more likely to have metabolic disorders like diabetes, digestive issues, weight gain. It can negatively impact sperm production, and it can result in irregular or even absent menstrual cycles. And by the way, these effects of stress can be damaging, by the way, even when you appear fine on the outside. So there's this great study by two psychologists actually here at Northwestern in Evanston. And what they found was that low-income students of color who were deemed to be successful, like they were doing well in college, they were persistent, they had high-paying jobs, that actually at a cellular level, they were aging more quickly. And your sort of the age, as your cells age, that's actually a predictor of chronic health problems and even hidden, even early death, right? So there's this hidden toll for some people for being successful, and it's because they're in this chronic state of anxiety. Which really just means we need to figure out ways to provide more support. So that's so anxiety, there's this sort of there's the sort of psychological piece, and then there's a physical piece to it. And part of what concerns us is that there's this collective anxiety that we're currently experiencing. It seems like no matter where we turn, like I said, there's something going on. So we want to talk about how do we cope with anxiety. I like to think of it as like your best defense is a good offense, although a good defense is also necessary, or your best offense is a good defense, whatever way you want to put it, right? Is that there are things that we want to do proactively, and then there are things that we can actually do them also when things come up that are stressful to us. Just a quick couple words about what's ineffective. What's an ineffective way of coping? I just want to highlight two things. One, social withdrawal is not something you want to be doing regularly, even though often when we're very anxious, we want to just go home and eat ice cream and lie on the sofa. We'll talk in a minute about the importance of actually seeking community. And the other thing is substance use, whether we're talking alcohol or other substances. Yes, they do provide immediate comfort and a temporary escape, but what they are is they're numbing, so they're not actually addressing our concerns, and actually they decrease the likelihood that we're then going to address them, the underlying issues. And also, substances are known to decrease impulse control. And so that means you're more likely, so it exacerbates, the anxiety or the depression, but also you're more likely to engage in some kind of regrettable behavior, which then just sort of might escalate. Particularly, by the way, there's stuff now more and more about how cannabis itself, so marijuana, can be quite problematic, especially for men or males, sort of young adults, 16 to 25. It seems that there are increasing number of incidents where we're using cannabis is resulting in psychosis. In men experience their first episode of their first psychotic break. And by the way, if you experience a psychotic episode, you're then more likely to develop schizophrenia. So there is something right now, about cannabis not being used necessarily as a way to cope, but also it leads to some other problems. We'll start with self-care, which I think seems obvious to many people, but what I really want to do right now is I want you to understand why it's important to do some of these things. So self-care is essentially, it's engaging in activities, right? They give your mind time to rest, and reset. And one of the ways to do that is sleep. Just like our mobile phones or our laptops need to be charged every night, sleep recharges our brain and it optimizes functioning. We know that people who, I think everyone here has probably had an experience where you didn't sleep well the night before, and then you were pretty irritable, did not do a good job of controlling your emotions. And we know that the next night when you slept better, that the next day you were actually managing yourself much better. We actually don't know exactly why how sleep sort of helps to decrease anxiety and help regulate emotions. But we know that it's important. 7 to 9 hours a night for most people, 8 to 10 hours for teens. Having a bedtime routine that can entail also some kind of way that you sort of slow down. So like meditation, there are all sorts of apps now with sleep meditations. Personally, I listen to a podcast. I listen to Smartless because it's just, it's basically just interviewing, Hollywood people. So if I miss something, it doesn't matter. But it's just the fact that I'm focusing on something else somehow relaxes me, and I fall asleep. If you can't fall asleep, don't stay in bed. Like actually get out of bed, do something for 20 minutes, and then go back to bed. And remember that bed is for sleeping only. So, we get conditioned when we see certain things to behave in certain ways, right? Like sort of like when I see ice cream, I start to salivate, right? So I'm conditioned because I know what's about to happen. So your bed, you want it so that every time you see your bed, your body already starts to shut down and quiet down, and your brain starts to quiet down, and you're going to bed. If you do other things in bed, like your homework or watching TV or scrapbooking, then your bed is no longer just associated with sleeping. If you're not having trouble at all, don't worry about this. But if this is something that if you're having some trouble, these are some things to think about. And of course, there is therapy for insomnia, and there are sleep specialists out there. Exercise is a great thing. Again, why? Because it gets your heart pumping, which reduces inflammation. It releases endorphins, which activate the opiate receptors in your body, which causes a sort of analgesic effect. And it boosts production of dopamine and serotonin, which are neurotransmitters that we know are involved in fighting depression and anxiety. Even moderate exercise makes a difference. Like, don't feel like if I'm not training for a marathon, what's the point? It could be running for 15 minutes. It could be walking for 30. It could be, you could split it up into, 10 walks 3 times a day. It's also great because of distraction. It can be a social endeavor, especially if the exercise is, if you're playing a sport. And if you're outdoors, the benefit is that you're also, it's a great source for vitamin D, and deficits in vitamin D are associated with increased symptoms of depression and anxiety. So we really do want to keep our vitamin D level up. Finally, we're going to talk about, in terms of self-care, we're going to talk about food, and that what you eat is actually an important component of mental health. We'll see right now a short clip that's talking about this. This is a clip from 2017, but there are now psychiatrists. They're called nutritional psychiatrists, and part of their approach to helping people who are struggling with their mental health is actually at least to start with diet, because there are actually some amazing outcomes from it. And here we go. Let's just hope that we don't get a commercial. Which we're going to get. So I'm going to talk for another second here while this commercial is going on. And if I talk long enough about how I'm going to talk about something, I think the commercial will end. So I think we're about there. All right. And I know you can't hear anything.
Government figures show more than 16 million American adults report having a major episode of depression in the past year. Women are affected more often than men. A new field of study, nutritional psychiatry, looks at how diet can improve mental health. It could help patients shift from pharmaceuticals to food-based therapies. Our Dr. Tara Narula is here. Good morning.
Good morning, Nora.
I could talk about this forever. I'm so fascinated by this subject. So just broadly speaking, what is nutritional psychiatry?
Well, it's the idea that maybe a psychiatrist should be asking you what was on your dinner plate last night. What did you eat for lunch? The idea that food plays an essential role in our mental health in the same way that we think about it playing a role in cardiovascular disease, in our blood sugar management, in our gastrointestinal health. John LaPook just did Sunday morning. We talked about its effects on cancer. So it's something that we don't often think about. But there has been recent research in this emerging field in the last 5 years that shows that healthier dietary patterns can reduce the risk of things like depression and anxiety.
And what's the connection?
So the brain is a highly metabolic organ. It uses a lot of energy, a lot of nutrients. It's always on. And it depends on fuel, but not just any fuel, like a car. You want to give it expensive, high quality fuel. That means foods that have the right nutrients, the right vitamins, the right sources of protein, because these form the building blocks for the neurotransmitters in the brain, for the cellular structure of the brain, for the enzymes in the brain.
All I know is a cheeseburger always puts me in a really good mood, and I know I know you're not talking about that kind of food, unfortunately.
No, we're not.
So when you talk about healthy kind of food, other than the usual, the greens and the legumes and the avocados. What are, I like those too. What are the unexpected things that people might not think about that you think you should try
Yeah, that's
that?
a mood booster.
That's a
Well,
mood booster.
there are healthy dietary patterns, for instance, the Mediterranean diet that's been
Yes.
studied and shown to reduce risk of depression. But there's also specific nutrients and vitamins, things like the B vitamins, omega-3s, iron, zinc, folate, magnesium, choline. These are some other things that people can think about, probiotics, prebiotics. And the idea is that when you eat these foods, essentially many of them can become the basis for the brain chemicals, the neurotransmitters. So serotonin, for instance, one of the main neurotransmitters in the brain, 90% of it is produced in the gastrointestinal tract. In addition, the fruits and vegetables that you eat give you antioxidants. These can be anti-inflammatory. It can boost your immune system when you get the right vitamins. So there's a lot of ways or potential pathways that these.
And there's a lot of connection, too, as you're just getting to, I can tell, it's the microbiome,
Right.
gut bacteria, how important
Yes.
gut bacteria is. And one of the, I try and eat yogurt every morning. What are the other things that help your gut bacteria improve it?
Fermented foods, so sauerkraut, kimchi, probiotics, prebiotics, things like Brussels sprouts, onions, garlic. These things can essentially boost your body's own natural bacteria. But yes, the gut bacteria, they work as a defense layer, preventing the flow of bad toxins across that layer that can potentially get into the blood and be pro-inflammatory. They also work to help the communication in the neurons between the gut and the brain.
So can I just ask real quick, is there somebody out there now, a doctor, if you gave them your diet, they could look at everything that's in there?
There are nutritional psychiatrists, yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes.
Okay, you lost me at sauerkraut, but I came back with Brussels sprouts. You like this?
And you can
Thank
put,
you, Dr. Tara.
And you can put avocado on a cheeseburger.
Yes, you can. I've done that.
Yeah, it's good.
Seen it at Chef Jeff.
All right. So I don't know if everyone caught the fact that 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut. So that kind of gives you a sense of, oops, not what I meant to do. It gives you a sense of that there is a profound connection between the brain and the gut. So let's move on to social media. Again, we're talking about coping skills, and the answer I'm going to tell you right now is not to be on social media more. I think we need to think about the fact that social media came out of nowhere. It's here to stay. And really, at this point, we just have to figure out how to manage it. And there are benefits, of course, right? It's a great way to stay in touch with people. Some great cooking recipes, you can find on Instagram. I personally, one of my ways to relax is to look at nail art. There's some really talented people in this world. I don't even do my nails, by the way, but nail art is something I enjoy looking at. But what happens when you're experiencing like daily anxiety about things like global warming or world conflicts, or how helpful is social media, or actually media in general, by the way, right? And the answer is that it exacerbates anxiety. There's a study that came out in 2014. I'm gonna actually just skip to the slide over here. It was the following the Boston Marathon bombing. For those of you who might not remember, it was a domestic terror attack committed by two brothers in April of 2013. It was at the finish line of the Boston Marathon. 3 people were killed, hundreds were injured. And then there was a 4-day manhunt. I think one brother died early on, and the other one, was caught, tried in court, and received the death penalty. And we were all pretty much, it was all we could talk about or think about, especially I think because of the man chase. So there was a study immediately after the bombing, and a survey was administered which looked at the impact of viewing bombing-related media in the weeks after the bombing, and it was looking at what is the effect is there some sort of relationship between how many hours we view we're on social media and on TV, and how our mental health is doing. And the result was pretty amazing. They found that those who engaged in 6 or more hours of bombing-related media exposure, so that's social media, that's watching TV, that's engaging it with your friends on it online, it's watching it on TV. Those who engaged in 6 or more hours on a daily basis in that week that followed the bombing, that they actually experienced higher acute stress. So sort of the stress that is like right after the bombing, they experienced higher acute stress than those who were directly exposed to the bombing. They were more stressed out than people who were actually at the finish line where the bombs went off. All right. So you can see actually that way in which social media, mass media, it actually becomes a conduit that spreads the negative consequences of community trauma sort of beyond even the directly affected community, right? So it's like this conduit to sort of increasing collective anxiety after, in response to some kind of world event or traumatic event. So social media and media in general, then, right, it's contributing to our collective anxiety. And I want to, I'm thinking about some of my own experiences and the experiences that other friends have told, we talk about, which is that, you're scrolling, or you're just, by the way, going online, and but particularly when you're scrolling and all your friends are like sharing, oh my God, can you believe this political scandal took place? Or oh my God, World War III is about to emerge. Listen to this clip. Or these sort of gloom and doom warnings about climate change. So when people are anxious, right, like we want to talk to people about it. We want to share it with people. We think that it's going to make us feel better. Sort of like we think that it's like when we're with a friend and we just sort of share with them something that's stressful for us. But with that friend, when we do that, that friend is right there and can give us a hug. They can, help us talk through our feelings. When we just put things out there on social media, or when we're receiving these things that are just being put out on social media, all we're doing actually is increasing anxiety. It's kind of like if, the classic example of like you're in a movie theater and somebody shouts fire, right? What does fire do, right? Fire induces anxiety and panic in people. It's actually not an effective way to clear the movie theater. The effective way to clear the movie theater is to say, ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem. I would please like, row 1, will you please get up and leave? Row 2, please get up and leave. And so the difference there is that in fire, all I did was I threw something out there to make you anxious. And the other example, what I've done is I've actually given you an action you can take with it. And we'll talk in a minute about how taking actions is a way to feel better. So it's really good to think about social media like a snack food, right? You're not going to snack all day. And when you snack, sometimes those empty sugars are fabulous. But actually long-term, you want it to be, something with like protein that's going to give you fuel, or maybe yogurt because it's a good probiotic, right? And so with that in mind, we definitely want to take breaks from news. So hard, but like take social media off your phone. I know a few people who have done that, and they have reported an immense increase in their well-being. Muting or unfollowing accounts that are stressful. Limiting your intake, like maybe 30 minutes a day, and split it out across the day. Don't doom scroll. I think I'm 100% guilty of that, and every once in a while I actually, a family member will come to me and say, you got to get off your phone. And I'll be like, you're right, it's not helpful. And also don't get your news from social media. There are a lot of unverified accounts out there. There are people who, we haven't always figured out what a legitimate source is. So it's good to look at, a few trusted sources and look at diverse sources as well. Don't stay in your echo chamber. It's an important thing to sort of expand a little. And by the way, back in the day when there were only 3 networks, news was actually covered in a much more objective way. But then somebody sort of said, oh, hey, when we start to give our opinion and start to sort of give it a certain spin, we actually get more of a profit, right? So also remember that even legitimate news sources, their job is to produce clickbait news for you, and it's to get you to come back more and more. And ultimately, what's happening is they're making money by completely polarizing us. Social media. Another thing to think about is the importance of community. We are neurologically wired to connect with others. We need to belong. We need to be accepted by a group. That's why we have friends. That's why we want to have coworkers to go out to lunch with. That's why we join teams, like athletic teams. That's why you might go to a religious institution or a spiritual institution, because of the community. We get strength from unity. These conflicts that we're talking about, right, like climate change, world conflicts, political turbulence, it makes us feel less supported and less safe. And so having a community is a meaningful way to cope with our collective anxiety. And it's a reminder that there are other people who feel like this, and that we're not alone, and it's empowering, and it also provides us with opportunities to engage in joyful activities. When you're socially connected, it's something to strive. So being socially connected, excuse me, is something to strive for. Control. That is the 4th coping skill. And by control, I mean know what you can control. So one of the reasons all these, we're experiencing this collective anxiety is that these events around the world make us feel powerless, and they highlight the uncertainty inherent to life. And one way to cope with anxiety is to focus your efforts on things over which you actually have control. So I don't want to say don't worry about things that you can't control, but in a sense, put your energy and your efforts where you actually can have an impact. I always like this cartoon here, right? Like the point is, if you did something in the past and you're not happy with it, you can't change it. The only thing you can control is sort of what you're doing now, and then its impact. So just stick with stick with what you actually can engage with. And that can be, by the way, something really simple, like focusing on breathing, right? So when you focus on your breathing, you're doing 2 things. One, you're engaging your sympathetic nervous system. And so it is actually sort of slowing down your heart rate, and again, it's just helpful in terms of its impact on your body, but it's also a way to assert control, because you are in charge of your breathing exercise. And then there are large things that you can do, like engaging in collective action. We'll start by, but breathing, by the way, and I can, Wendy, maybe we'll send out a few links for people about ways to exert control, and maybe some meditation things. But again, breathing, there's something called box breathing, where you basically inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, sort of wait 4 seconds, and start the cycle again. And it really does, it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. I think I misspoke earlier. It relaxes the nerves that are otherwise sort of activated when you're stressed out. And then collective action, which is another way of generating control, and also a great way to find community. is a great way to reduce your anxiety. So, so when we talk about collective activism, which should say collective activism, that's action that you're taking together with a group of people, like to improve some sort of situation that you have a common goal for or a common objective. So these might be things like, advocating for civil rights, or if you have political anxiety, canvassing for a candidate. So those are things that you can do in response to some of the things that are going on in the world, is becoming active in promoting knowledge about them. But we know from some studies that actually, if you do it as collective activism as opposed to individual activism, you're more likely to reduce anxiety. And there was a study that looked at young people, and it found, young adults, and it found that those who engaged in collective activism, so for instance, trying to lobbying for policy change, that they actually had better mental health or better well-being than those who really only engaged in individual action. So think of it this way: we should all recycle, but recycling isn't going to necessarily make you as an individual. If we each do it individually, it isn't necessarily going to help us feel a little better. It's not necessarily going to reduce our anxiety. But if we band together with a group of friends and we go to our employer and lobby for the employer to start recycling at work, that will give us a sense of agency. And it is also a way that we, with a group of people, supported each other and bonded. So those are both ways to combat anxiety, collective anxiety. And I'm going to sort of finish off with the fifth coping mechanism, which has more to do with the interpersonal conflicts that we now have about these sort of global issues. I'm guessing, I think I mentioned at the beginning, right? Like, many people on the Zoom might have a family member or friend or colleagues that they avoid discussing the sources of their collective anxiety, right? For fear that it's going to lead to some kind of unpleasant encounter from which there's no return. As a general rule, I think, don't engage with people online. So when I'm talking about conversations, I'm not talking about online people. It just sort of, contributes to incivility and polarization. But if there's someone in your life or who you've generally avoided talking about it with this person, and it actually then increases your anxiety, you're sort of stuck between two places. You feel like talking to this person will increase your anxiety, but also being with them increases your anxiety. One of the things that's really important to do is to come in with like an open mind and try to learn other people's perspectives. I do see that we have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we finish off with the video that's sort of on this topic. And so this notion of like reframing, like you're going into this conversation not to convince somebody, because by the way, you're most likely going to fail if people have strongly held views. But you are going into conversations in order to learn more about why they think the way they do, not just how. And you shouldn't go into it assuming everyone's gonna come out of this with the same opinion as you. But what you really want to do, and this is the thing that I think we're so polarized that we actually forget, and that polarization is part of what makes us anxious. What we forget is that, in fact, most of us have more in common than we have than not. And so to identify commonalities with people is actually an amazing way ultimately to reduce anxiety. I'm gonna show this video.
And we'll hang on for those of you who
Yeah.
can a few minutes longer for Q&A. So don't stress if you can. And we'll hang on for this.
Okay. Let's go back.
I would describe my political views as the new right.
I'd say that I'm left.
Feminism today is man-hating.
I would describe myself as a feminist, 100%.
I don't believe that climate change exists.
We're not taking enough action on climate change.
I think it's about time these people got off the high horse and started looking for credible problems that actually exist.
It's absolutely critical that trans people have their own voice.
That's not right. You can't, you know, you're a man, be a man, or you're a female, be a female.
Women do need to remember that we need you to have our children.
Could I be friends with someone that says a woman's place is in the home?
Right, OK, well, I'm an expert at flat packs. If you have any trouble, just watch me.
So it looks like I've got your instructions here.
I think so.
Let me help you.
It's not just that bit there.
Describe what it is like to be you in 5 adjectives.
Okay, frustrating.
Dedicated.
Opinionated.
Lucky.
Ambitious.
Offensive.
Solemn. I have ups and downs.
Strong.
I don't want to say attacked. Misunderstood.
Name 3 things you and I have in common.
We're both male, we're both confident, and we're both loudly spoken.
We know each other better than people who've known each other for 10 minutes should.
You seem quite ambitious and positive, and you've got this really, got a glow. Do you know what I'm saying? Your aura's pretty cool.
I'm sensing, are you former military or something?
People have said that, but there is no,
Really?
there is no history. So are you then ex-military?
Yeah.
If you're ex-military, I'm very proud of you already.
Well,
So
I grew up in a bit of a rough state. I've experienced homelessness. I've known what it's like to have absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm definitely most grateful just for life.
We've only just met, but I think you're the sort of person that would listen to me and we'd have a discussion rather than an argument.
Yeah, you could hang out with, man.
let's go. My chance.
Goodness sake.
You're right, mate.
Fitter than I look.
Perfecto.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
So basically, I think we just put a bar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here you are. Each take a bottle and place it on its corresponding markings on the bar.
Attention. Please now stand to watch a short film.
Feminism today is definitely an excuse for misandry, man-hating.
If somebody said to me that climate change is destroying the world, then I'd say that is total piffle.
So transgender, it is very odd. We're not set up to understand or see things like that.
I am a daughter, a wife. I am transgender.
I feel like the battle for feminism definitely isn't done. The fight is never going to be over, if I'm honest with you.
You now have a choice. You may go, or you can stay and discuss your differences over a beer.
I'm only joking.
You had me for a second then.
Well, I'm having a drink.
I'm having a drink.
Yeah.
I want to discuss.
Beer.
Yeah, beer and discuss.
Cheers.
At the end of the day, mate,
About
I've
reaching
enjoyed
out to
working
people,
with you.
yeah. And, you know, even if you wanted to convince people about your point, the productive thing to do would be to sit down and have a
Engage,
beer.
engage.
I've been brought up in a way where everything's black and white, but life isn't black and white.
Yeah, I'm just me.
Yeah.
Smash the patriarchy.
I'll give you my mobile number, you give me yours, and we'll keep in touch. I'd have to tell my girlfriend that I'll be texting another girl. She might be a bit upset with that, but I'll have to get round that.
I'll have to tell my girl.
She'll have to lump it.
That is a beer commercial, but
But it is fabulous.
but it is fabulous, yeah. Okay, so I'm actually at this point, I will just we can conclude, right? That there are these coping skills that we can use. And also, you know, we're no shame on you. So I always want to remind you that there is no shame in seeking professional mental help when you're struggling. And that is it. And Wendy, I think you have a few words you want to say.
Yeah, so we have a couple questions. So anyone who can hang on for a few minutes will answer them. But for those who have to leave, I just want to thank you so much for coming. Anat, if you could unshare your screen, I just want to
Yeah.
show something real
Yeah.
quick.
Hold on. There we go.
We have a real, if you're zooming in from the Chicagoland area, we have an incredible program coming up in May for Mental Health Awareness Month. It's a conversation with General Greg F. Martin, a retired 2-star general who talks about his experience with mental illness and bipolar disorder. And prior to the program, we have a mental health fair hosted by No Shame on You's incredible teen leadership group, and it's partnering with the city of Evanston, and it's free. We just require a registration, and you can find this on our website, www.noshameonyou, on the front page. We have a short survey if you could fill it out. So that I put in the chat. So we have a couple questions. Not the first question is, what if social groups and people are your actual source of anxiety? People groups we thought were allies and safe people, but no longer are, or they're silent or helping to facilitate religious discrimination.
That's a very timely question, obviously. There's a few ways to answer this, and one is that employers are still responsible for ensuring that the workplace is civil, and that no one is being harassed for any reason. So it is always important to potentially talk to leadership and actually ask them what is their strategy for ensuring that people can continue to work together during whatever a difficult time is. And then I think, wait, was the question like friends, people you thought were people that they thought were friends, or is this
They thought were allies? People or groups we thought were allies. Safe people are no longer that.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people are experiencing that right now and are in the process of figuring out how to answer that. It would be good if there would be a way to at least have conversations that are, again, this idea of like open to learning about why somebody feels the way that they do. An example that I can give is, excuse me, is I read recently someone there was a blog about how about why she voted for Trump in 2016. And she said that it was because her son had all sorts of learning and behavioral issues. And she was working a second job in order to make sure that he got the resources he needed, that he got the tutors that he had, that they could afford the medication that he needed. And that in fact, they were no longer going with, they had given up on their car. They no longer had car insurance in order to be able to provide support for their child. And then in the meantime, their perception is that immigrants are coming, refugees are coming, and that they're getting places to live, that people are, that the government is, facilitating their integration, that all these resources are being spent on those kids. And putting aside whether or not that's correct or not correct, that was actually, that's the kind of thing that's important to understand, like, where do you come from and why? And to somehow try to engage in those civil conversations and making sure that you're that if it's at a workplace situation, that leadership is on it, and that also, unfortunately, sometimes we also have to find new friends. Because it's exactly the point is that whoever your allies were or whoever that group of friends are, those are people that are supposed to boost you. So I'll start with that. I will think if there's more. I think this is a lot of people right now are struggling with that question.
So
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Nat.
No, I was going to say, I find that one of the things that also contributes to that feeling of where are my allies is actually when I go on social media and I am encountered with opinions that I think sometimes are important to hear. But again, it's this sense of it'd be better off if I didn't know sometimes what was being said out there.
Yeah. I think those are all good food for thought. This is a similar-ish question, but I will pose it. How to deal with / think about hate and prejudice, like hearing about anti-Semitism that's in so many places these days. And when it comes from people you can't just sit down and talk with, that's much harder to deal with than just opposing political opinion.
Yeah, there are times, right. So the sort of my caveat was like, it's always important to reach across and like learn about why people think the way they think they do. I am Jewish, and I don't know that if a Nazi was sitting across from me, that is actually something that should be encouraged to do. And that unfortunately, there probably are times where there's a fundamental disagreement because those opinions are based on racism on racism. So again, that's a sort of situation where sometimes it's important to know that fighting up against something is not the solution, because you're not going to convince that person, and B, it does there's an emotional toll on you. There's a lot of stuff out there, and maybe Wendy, it's like for another talk that someone could do for Feed Your Mind, or we could put something together on the sort of like when to try to convince somebody and when not. We all have a lot of cognitive biases, right? Like things that prevent us, even when information is right in front of us, from actually seeing that our opinion was wrong because we're so engaged in it. So I think that's actually something to learn. Now, there was another study that's actually kind of related to this, and it actually was there's sort of two similar studies. One was done in 2007, and one was done, I think, 2017 or 18. I don't quite remember when. Two different groups, and both of them were looking at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and they had people on all ends. They had sort of settlers, and they had Hamas supporters. The question was sort of like, would you agree, to a two-state solution? And not surprisingly, the more extreme you were on either end, the less likely you were to accept that as a viable option. However, they did an intervention where they basically said, let's say to the Palestinians, they said, the Israelis are willing to acknowledge that you have suffered quite a bit, that you guys have been displaced. Would you now agree to a two-state solution? And even people on the extreme end were far more likely to say sure. Likewise, so Israeli settlers, if they were told, Palestinians acknowledge how much you've been victimized and that the Holocaust was a terrible thing, are you willing to now accept a two-state solution? And they were far more likely. The point of that, and by the way, if you offered each side money, we'll give you like financial incentives if you agree to a two-state solution. The more extreme you were, the more outraged you were, and the more you condoned violence, actually. So the point of this is the idea that when we connect on a social emotional level and allow ourselves to see the other person, or feel like we are seen, that's the point, feel like we are seen and feel like our emotions are being validated, we are far more likely to compromise. Not saying that's going to be the solution today to what's going on, but I think that also is like in a workplace situation, to think about what are the things that they need to understand about me, and that I need to understand about them, that might open my mind a little bit more to what they're, why they think the way they think.
Thank you, Anat. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around late. And we hope to see you soon. Our next Feed Your Mind is next month in May, and it is called The Basic pH. It's in partnership with an awesome nonprofit called JCFS Chicago. So you will get information in your email about it, and we hope to see you soon. And if you're local here in the Chicago area, come see us on May 19th for with the city of Evanston. Take care, everyone, and have a great week.